Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Orly Lewis, and I'm the CEO of the Weinstein JCC. And I'm grateful for being here this evening with you. And thank you for adhering to our COVID protocol by wearing masks during the program and in our building. Today is a very special day for us as a community. As we are emerging from the biggest health crisis in our history, our JCC, the Weinstein JCC, the engine of our community, has demonstrated a remarkable strength and continues to be the Times Square of our community. A place where people form connections, friendships, and access much-needed programs, services such as preschool, after-school, camp, social connections for the elderly, and a place where people take care of their physical and spiritual needs. Today, just to share with you the day at the J, the BBYO Youth Group has met for the first time in person in 20 months. We had our tryouts of our youth soccer leagues, and a lovely birthday party took place in our outdoor playground. Along with all the members that came to swim, work out, or just to meet here at our sessions, at our lobby. This evening special program is our first Art and Idea program since March 2019. And coming up, Wednesday from 5 to 7, we'll host a community outdoor block party, celebration and music and food. And on October 14th, we're going to have and celebrate Shabbat together in the outdoors with drumming circles and a delicious Shabbat dinner. This is quite a recovery. I would like to acknowledge and thank our remarkable professional and lay leadership team for their dedication, support, and creativity. I'm eager to start this evening's program, but before I do so, I would like to thank the following in making this evening possible. The Virginia Holocaust Museum, Virginia Museum of History and Culture, Black History Museum, and the Richmond Symphony for bringing Violins of Hope to Richmond. And a very special thank you to Linda and Earl Ferguson of blessed of memory, the sponsors of tonight's chamber music concert. We much appreciate your support over the years and especially your love for the center. Thank you. And this Violin of Hope concert was originally planned as part of our 2019 and 20 Arts and Ideas season. I want to thank and acknowledge our sponsor and subscribers for that season for their generous support of the Jewish cultural arts at the Weinstein JCC. We have a wonderful lineup for this year and invite you to join us as subscribers and sponsors of Arts and Idea. The season, which will be both virtual and in person, officially kicks off on Thursday, October 21st at 7:30 p.m. with Dance With Me to the End of Love. A concert on songs written by Leonard Cohen, performed by the Jewish folk singer Bachchevitz. All are also welcome to join us this evening at the Sarah D. November Gallery following the concert to meet and greet with the musicians and the instruments. While there, please take a moment to view our art exhibit, Meaning and Making Through Arts Making, a collection of reproduction of the work created during the Holocaust in camps, ghettos, and in hiding. Much like the music we are about to hear tonight, the artwork speaks, exemplifying the power of creativity and the strength of the spirit. The book, Violin of Hope, Instruments of Hope and Deliberations in Mankind's Darkest Hour, will be available for purchase, and its author, Dr. James Grimes, our guest for this evening, will be autographing the book and signing at the table in the lobby. It's not by accident that our first gathering here this evening is during the holiday of Sukkot, which we are supposed to increase the level of our joy. I hope this evening brings you all much joy, as the Violin of Hope is a remarkable story of resiliency and courage. The story details how the violins came to survive one of our darkest time in our history and became a symbol of hope. It is my pleasure now to introduce my colleague and dear friend, Sam Asher, CEO of the Virginia Holocaust Museum, who will say a few words about the evening's program and introduce James Grimes, the author of the book, Violins of Hope, and a guest of our evening program. May our community go from strength to strength, and may all of us do the same. Have a great evening.
Good evening. It is wonderful to be here at the Weinstein JCC. And it is wonderful, thank you. And thank you for coming. It is a very, very important program that you are going to hear tonight, called the Violins of Hope. And you're going to hear a community concert played by Richmond musicians and organized by Jocelyn Vornberg, and I don't know if she can hear me, but if you can't, Jocelyn, we love you. Thank you for all of your help. It's been almost 4 years that we've been organizing to bring Violins of Hope to Richmond. We had a little delay. You heard a little bit about it from Orly. Unfortunately, we had to push back, but now we've got the Violins of Hope at a great time because students are able to hear and see the instruments. And I'm going to tell you that we've had over 20 educational programs already with students, and whether it's students at St. Catherine's or students in Chesterfield schools, or other public schools, it's been amazing, and we're going to continue to do all of those programs through the time that they leave. But way, way back in 2017, I met with Amnon Weinstein, and I found out about the Violins of Hope, and I knew it was a very, very important program. And then Jocelyn and I went to Nashville to hear them played when Nashville had the Violins of Hope. And there, the main organizing center for the Violins of Hope was their symphony. Here, as you've already heard, we have the Virginia Holocaust Museum, Virginia Museum for History and Culture, and Black History Museum, all hosting different displays of violins. 7 at our museum, 7 at History and Culture, and 7 at the Black History, 5 at the Black History Museum. And they all have different themes. So once you go into one of the museums, you get one of these little violin pins, you get to go into the other museums for free, and it's very important to see all of the different instruments and find out all of the different stories. As you know, these are violins that were resurrected from the Holocaust, and they tell a story. And I've been interviewed a few times, and I say, you know, it's very difficult sometimes to understand the ferocity of the Holocaust, the 6 million, and 6 million Jews that were killed and 13 million killed in camps. It's so difficult to understand 1.5 million children being killed with their parents. It's heart-wrenching, diabolical. It's so hard to understand. But when you can tell it one story at a time, it seems easier to tell those stories. And for those of you who heard Jay talk a few moments ago about Feivel Weininger, the story is of someone there who had a violin, who could play the violin in difficult situations and get his family out of difficult situations and save their lives. So this is what it's about, one story at a time. And of course, we tell Many, many different stories, all of us, because we're all part of the people who tell these stories. And it's very important that we continue to tell these stories, because the research has shown that if people understand a little bit about the Holocaust, if they've read, if they've been involved, if they've heard some stories, they're far less likely to be involved in anti-Semitism or racism or other forms of bigotry. So get people to come see the violins, get them to the concerts. Tonight is the 5th concert, believe it or not, and there are 3 more concerts and maybe another one after that. The Virginia Arts Festival and our Holocaust Commission are doing a concert on October 6th, Beth Ahava on October 17th, the Virginia Museum for History and Culture on the 24th, and even the Roanoke community is hosting them on October 19th. So we've been on both sides of the state and certainly in Central Virginia. So we're doing the best that we can to get the word out. We thank you all for coming. And now it's my real privilege to introduce a friend who has been helping to tell the story. And if you don't have a copy of James Grimes's book, they're on sale here, and we have more at the Virginia Holocaust Museum. The book is called Violins of Hope, Instruments of Hope and Liberation in Mankind's Darkest Hour. He is a VCU grad. He's a native Richmonder. And he wrote this book and went to Tel Aviv to hear the story directly from Amnon and Avshi as he wrote this amazing book. He's an internationally respected musicologist, a critically acclaimed author, dynamic speaker. Well, you're going to find that out in a second. He's addressed audiences all over the country. And there's been interviews in the New York Times, ABC News, etc. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to call Professor James Grimes.
Thank you, Sam, for that very warm introduction. It's a genuine pleasure and honor to be here this afternoon in Richmond, which, as Sam said, is my hometown. I was born just down the street at St. Mary's Hospital, and I'm a proud alum of Virginia Commonwealth University. We have a really special treat for all of us this afternoon. We have the chance to hear some really beautiful music played by wonderful musicians. And we have the chance to see and hear some historical instruments. These instruments are the Violins of Hope. Violins of Hope, as most of you probably know, is a collection of violins that were played primarily by Jewish musicians before and during the Holocaust. These instruments have been lovingly restored by master Israeli violin maker Amnon Weinstein and his son Avshi, who many of you have had a chance to meet the past several weeks here in Richmond. So we are going to see some of these instruments and hear them, and it will be my privilege to also tell you the stories of some of these instruments and of what they and their owners went through together during the Holocaust. And as Sam indicated, how for many people their abilities to play these violins made the difference between whether they lived or died. I'll talk about some of the violins this evening, but I'd like to start off by discussing an instrument that is here in Richmond. When it's not being played, you can see it at the Virginia Holocaust Museum, but it's been played throughout the city and has been slated for being played elsewhere as Violins of Hope Richmond unfolds. It just doesn't happen to be here tonight. It is an instrument that was once played in the men's camp of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Now, Auschwitz-Birkenau, like many of the camps throughout the Nazi camp system, had its own orchestra. These were ensembles comprised of prisoners who, once it was discovered they had the ability to play an instrument, were assigned to play in the camp orchestra. The camp orchestra's main responsibility was to perform at the gates of the camp in the mornings when the prisoners would be lined up in regular rows of 5 to be marched out on their way to work detail. The orchestra provided what the Germans like to call marching discipline. They would play these schmaltzy German marches that provided a beat that allowed the prisoners to stay in step as they marched out, and the Nazis counted them in their regular rows of 5. Many of the prisoners in the orchestra were also assigned to work detail, but they would be the last ones out after their other prisoners had left, and they would be the first ones back to set the orchestra back up to begin playing as their fellow prisoners dragged their exhausted bodies back into the camp that evening. Some of the prisoners who were assigned to the orchestra had privileged work positions. Some were assigned to work, for example, in the kitchen, which gave the advantage not only of working inside in the Polish winter, but also the opportunity to perhaps grab an extra bite of food here and there. Some of the musicians were assigned to stay behind in the musicians' barracks and work on arranging and copying out new pieces. The Nazi administration of the camp was remarkably fixated on the repertoire of the orchestra and was constantly demanding new tunes. And so they would stay behind to prepare those. Membership in the orchestra by no means assured anybody's survival. But for a handful of prisoners, their ability to make music, and therefore their assignment in the orchestra, allowed them to have small privileges, small advantages that allowed them to live one more day, and then one more day, and then one more day, until ultimately they outlived the Nazi regime. After the liberation, many of the musicians who played in those orchestras never played again. Music, as we all know, is indelibly linked to memory. I've talked to survivors who, not even those who are in the orchestra, who still to this day cannot listen to music, because whenever they hear any type of melody, it takes them back to being in one of the camps. For the musicians who played in the orchestra, they had the additional tactile memory of every time they held their instruments or brought their instrument to their body, it transported them in their memory back to being in Auschwitz-Birkenau, being in such a place of such horrid despair, and perhaps being forced to play as they watched their fellow prisoners, maybe even including their own family members, being marched to their death. Those memories that were recalled every time they played were simply too painful, so they never played again. One musician who played in that orchestra right after the liberation sold his violin to a man named Abraham Davidovich. And Abraham bought the violin in the hopes that one of his 2 sons would learn to play it. The Davidovich boys never took to the violin, but as they kept it well into their adulthood, and they reached a point at which they said, we need to do something with this violin. It's historically significant. It deserves better than just being in our closet. And they considered donating it to Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Authority, but instead brought it to the Violins of Hope collection. What inspired the Davidovich brothers was that the violins would not only be put on display, but that they would be played again. I met with one of those sons, Freddie Davidovich, in Jerusalem, and he shared with me the sentiments I've heard from several of the survivors' grandchildren and children who brought the violins to the Violins of Hope. And that is this idea that this is a legacy that will continue. Freddie told me that it was his wish that this instrument would go well beyond him, as he said, and I hope for generations to come. With every passing year, there are sadly fewer Holocaust survivors among us to tell their stories. And I think, as Sam said, it's these stories that are so important. Exactly as Sam said, the human brain cannot comprehend the enormity of 6 million Jewish deaths, 1.5 million children. But the individual stories give us something to hang on to. That's why I think the writings of Anne Frank and Primo Levi, Elie Wiesel, and so many other figures are so important, because they help humanize an otherwise unfathomable tragedy. And so as we lose some of these stories, as the survivors are no longer among us, the violins now take a place as a different type of survivor, an inanimate object that will outlive all of us, and as Freddie Davidovich and so many others have hoped, go on to tell these very important stories for generations to come. We'll begin now the performance part of the evening, and I'll invite Allison Hall and Johanna Beaver out. Allison will be playing a violin that was once owned by a man named Henry Brinder. Brinder was a very talented Romanian violinist, and he studied at the conservatories in Bucharest and Budapest, and then was starting his career, but then was sent to a hard labor camp. But he managed to hold on to his violin, and then he escaped to the forest to fight alongside the partisans, these freedom fighters that were fighting from the woods. He survived the Holocaust as a partisan, and then he returned to his musical career, had a distinguished career with the Bucharest Philharmonic, but he kept trying to escape communist Romania and make his way to Israel. And so at one point he was jailed for 6 months. At one point he tried to escape, and he lost his position in the orchestra. But finally he was able to immigrate to Israel in 1985 and joined the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra as a second violinist, and had a career and retired there in 1985. And today we have with us that violin that accompanied him through this extraordinary journey, and we get the wonderful opportunity to not only hear it, but to see it, but hear it be played by wonderful musicians. Please join me in welcoming our musicians. Sam has asked me to put in a quick request during this transition for you to turn off your cell phones and any sort of noise-making devices. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Allison, and this is Johanna. We're playing a duo today by László Weiner. Well, if he were here, he would be László Weiner. In Hungary, he would be Weiner László. He was born in 1916 in Hungary, and he studied for quite a few years under Kodály, who's a very famous composer also. Weiner was a composer, a pianist, a conductor, and he married a fellow student in 1942. In early 43, though, he was arrested and taken to a labor camp in Slovakia. His teacher, Kodály, and his wife tried to get him out, but it was unsuccessful, and he was killed in 44. His wife survived thanks to her skills as an actress. She was able to go under a different persona as a Christian and elude the Gestapo when they interviewed her by acting so well. And she lived to an old age.
Before we heard the story of Henry Brinder and that violin, but you'll notice there was also a viola on stage. And for our next presentation, we're going to have a string duo of violin and cello. So the Violins of Hope is a collection primarily of violins, but there are some other string instruments in the collection. There is one viola and one cello, which comes in really handy when we want to do string quartets. Perhaps 85 or so violins, a viola and a cello. The viola and the cello and a few of the violins in the collection made their way to Israel actually before the Holocaust. These were brought by musicians who had been dismissed from their orchestral positions simply for being Jewish. And these were some of the finest musicians in all of Europe, holding top positions in Europe's top orchestras. And a Polish violinist by the name of Bronislaw Huberman had the genius idea of starting a new orchestra in what was at that time Palestine, as a way of, first of all, providing jobs for these musicians, but also to create an orchestra. Not only an orchestra of exiles, but an orchestra of all-stars. As Huberman said, what better way to confront this wave of anti-Semitism in the mid-30s that was rampant across Europe, but by creating an orchestra exclusively of Jewish musicians. And Huberman worked tirelessly to bring these musicians to Palestine, which was very, very difficult in the mid-30s as the British mandate had basically cut off access to the ability to immigrate. But Huberman was undeterred, and he kept forging ahead, coming to the United States to raise lots of money. There's a very famous picture of him sitting with Albert Einstein in Princeton as they are raising money together for what became the Palestine Orchestra. And by fighting really hard against that bureaucracy, Huberman was able to establish the ensemble that is now the Israel Philharmonic, one of the top orchestras in the world. But even more important than that, he was able to provide proper certificates and paperwork, not only for the musicians, but for their extended families. And in doing so, saved an estimated 1,000 lives by providing a means for those Jewish musicians to get out of Europe when they had no other way to get out and nowhere to go. So we've heard one of the violins that came to Palestine at that time, and we will now hear as well one of the cellos.
I just want to say it's a real pleasure for my wife and I to have this opportunity to play this piece for you today. This is a remarkable work that we're about to play. It was written by a student, which I think is pretty remarkable. It was written by Gideon Klein. He was born in 1919, and then he was interned in a concentration camp, first in Terezin, Auschwitz, and then he died first in Gruba at the age of 26. So you see that when he was first sent to Terezin, he was still a college student, and he had a girlfriend, actually, in Terezin, and she got his manuscripts when he was transferred out of that camp, and then she passed them on to his sister. The works were discovered of Gideon Klein in 1990, and when they were discovered, people were amazed at these pieces because this is truly an example of what could have been. It's so tragic. I think when you hear this work, and maybe just a few little words about this particular piece, this piece was not completed. You will hear it's in two movements. The first movement has all the notes. The second movement ends abruptly because he just didn't get to finish it. But on top of that, all of the final touches that go into a work like this were missing. All of the musical markings like dynamics and shadings and bowings. This has been a labor of love by my wife and I to interpret this music in a way that gives it justice. Because like I say, it was incomplete musically. But we hope you really enjoy this piece because I think, really, when you think about what could have been, this student who had so much talent, whose life was tragically cut short at the age of 26, it just makes you think, at least makes me think, wow, what he could have done with his life had he lived. It's such a tragedy. And I guess I'll be quiet now, and I hope you enjoy this work. Kathy and I have worked incredibly hard on it. It's a very difficult work, so hopefully we can do it the justice that it deserves. Thank you.
One of the violins we are about to hear was, one of the violins that we're about to hear was once owned by two girls from Romania. They were 9 and 11 when their parents bought this violin in the hope that they would both play it and they would both take lessons. Their mother ensured that they practiced between their lessons. During the Holocaust, their family managed to have the two girls moved from place to place as a way of keeping them safe. But along the way, the girls lost track of their family, and they had simply no way of knowing whether their parents had lived or died. After the Holocaust, a Jewish aid agency took the two children and put them on a boat to Palestine. They were interrupted by the British mandate and imprisoned on Cyprus for several years. It wasn't until the creation of the State of Israel on May 14th, 1948, that they were finally permitted to complete their voyage to now Israel, at which point they were reunited with their parents and their violin. And that's the violin that Alana will be playing on. And I want you to pay particular attention to the violin that Jocelyn will be playing on. It's one of several instruments in the collection that's a klezmer instrument. And you'll see it's beautifully decorated, including a gorgeous Star of David that's inlaid in mother of pearl. So enjoy the beautiful music, the beautiful instruments, and the wonderful musicians.
So I just wanted to give you a little bit of description about this piece. Grazia Bachchevitz, I'm sure I slaughtered how that is said, is a Polish woman. She was probably the second most famous female Polish composer. She was born in 1909, and she studied at the Warsaw Conservatory and then went to Paris and studied with Nadia Boulanger. And she studied violin with Carl Flesch, who we all know as from his violin technique study book, which we all sledged through high school and college in order to play. So she actually entered this piece, she wrote it in 1950 and entered this piece in a string quartet competition and was awarded first prize. She did live in Warsaw after she finished in Paris. She moved back to Warsaw and she lived there during the war. She was the concertmaster of the Polish Radio Orchestra. And she gave a lot of secret concerts during the war, but she stayed in Warsaw the entire time. This is a 3-movement piece, fast, slow, fast. The first movement starts actually a little slow and then gets into an allegro section. The second movement is really beautiful and reflective, and what I want to point out for you all is to watch the melodies move around the different instruments throughout that piece. It's that movement. And then the last movement is a Polish folk melody that's just kind of woven in and out. So we hope you enjoy it. Thanks for being here.
we conclude tonight's performance with string quartet movements by two more extraordinary women, I'd like to talk about yet another extraordinary woman by the name of Weinstein. Elsa was an extraordinarily talented violinist. She was a member of the Hamburg Chamber Orchestra. She played over Radio Hamburg. No small feats for a woman of her generation. She was also a member of the prestigious German Chamber of Music, which held sway over every aspect of professional musical life in Germany. With the passage of the shameful Nuremberg laws of 1935, Elsa Katzenstein and others were dismissed from their positions and had no way of making a living. In January 1939, Elsa and her husband sent their children Ruth and Paul to Belgium to stay with a Christian family while they could make plans to immigrate. And they sold virtually everything they owned to raise the funds to immigrate. And when they traveled that summer, having reunited with their children, this violin that Teresa's about to play is one of the few possessions that they kept with them as they made their way safely to America.
So this piece we're about to play is by the great Fanny Mendelssohn, and I think it's great that a lot of her music is being performed a lot more often nowadays. There's sort of been a resurgence of interest in her. Her brother, of course, is super famous, Felix Mendelssohn, but as you'll see, I mean, she has a lot to say, a lot of emotion that just wouldn't have been out in the world if she hadn't put it out there. You know, I mean, it's a really beautiful piece. Very moving. And there's Wagner, who was just a really disgusting human in a lot of ways. He wrote, like the year after Felix, her brother, died, he wrote an essay called Jewishness in Music. And I won't even dignify it by quoting it, but it's easy to look up, and it's not the best that humanity has to offer. I mean, it's pretty horrifying. And in it, he talks about basically what Jewish music cannot express. And I think that this will 100% disagree with every single thing in that essay. And she has a lot to express, and it's our honor to get to play it.
wanted to tell you a little bit about Florence Price's life. She was a really remarkable woman. She is from Little Rock, Arkansas, and at the age of 14, she was finished with school. She was a valedictorian of her class and went on to NEC to study piano, organ, and composition. NEC was one of the few conservatories or music schools at the time accepting African American students, so it was already quite a feat for her. And she finished and ended up in Atlanta as a music faculty member at Clark University, and then met her husband and relocated back to Little Rock, Arkansas, where she had her children and was teaching and composing. But then she and her family eventually, like a lot of other black people at the time, migrated north because of a very public lynching at the time and just a lot of elevated racial tension and violence. They moved to Chicago, which is where she spent the rest of her life as a very successful musician and composer. She was the first African-American woman to have her music performed by a major orchestra, which was the Chicago Symphony at the time, which is a very, very big deal. And she lived out her days composing, and in 2009, I believe, a couple found a bunch of music in their house, and it turned out that they were living in Florence Price's vacation home, and there's at least 200 scores of hers that they found there, and since then, people have been working together to put pieces back together and get them published. If you went to see the symphony this weekend, then you would have heard one of her pieces, a piano concerto, and today we're going to play the inner movement of her string quartet in G major. It's really beautiful. It's been described, the feeling as you're listening, as coming home. It's very American, so I hope you enjoy.
Our plan was to let the music speak for itself and to end on that note. So at this time, I want to wish you all a wonderful evening, and anyone who would like to join us in the gallery to meet the musicians, see the violins, or to meet Dr. Jay Grimes, that would be wonderful. Thanks so much for coming tonight.